بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا. اللهم إنا نسألك خير هذا اليوم فتحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه، ونعوذ بك من شره وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده. أصبحنا وأصبح الملك لله رب العالمين، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This particular course is entitled The Roots of Interpretative Disagreements. This particular title is a translation of the science known as Usul Al-Fiqh, which is often translated as the foundations of Islamic jurisprudence. It has many other translations that, and most of those translations don't accurately convey what the topic of Usul al-Fiqh is. The foundations of Islamic jurisprudence, to call it the foundations often will lead people to think that the only thing of concern in Usul al-Fiqh are the sources of Islamic law, that is to say the Quran, the Sunnah, Ijma' Qiyas, scholarly and consensus, and illegal analogy, among other things. Rather, there are other topics related to the science of Usul al-Fiqh, or the discipline of Usul al-Fiqh. And this is also why some translate it as the sources of Islamic jurisprudence, or the sources of Islamic law. Another translation offered at times for Usul al-Fiqh is Islamic legal theory. That also is somewhat limiting as well, because the legal theory, or what we call in Arabic al-Nadariyatul Fiqhiyya, is just simply one aspect of the greater discussion of Islam's legal philosophy. And Islam's legal philosophy covers not only Usul al-Fiqh, but it also covers a discussion of what we call the maqasid, or the objectives and goals of Islamic law, the qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, the legal maxims of Islamic law, among other things. Yet another translation offered at times for Usul al-Fiqh is jurisprudential principles. And that as well is very limiting too, in that it sort of reduces Usul al-Fiqh to a discussion of a number of maxims or principles which are to be applied, and it can give the impression that there's no discussion necessarily of the sources and the basis of the authority of the sources of Islam. And for this reason, in my attempts to try to give a more inclusive title to this particular topic, and also in such a way that actually makes it even appealing to people who would often be chased away by hearing titles such as jurisprudential principles, or the foundations or sources of Islamic law or jurisprudence, I call it the roots of interpretative disagreements. Because I do believe that this is fundamentally what Usul al-Fiqh is all about, is about helping us to understand, first and foremost, what were the bases or the things that led people to differ with one another, and the strength of their foundations and the sources of those disagreements, but ultimately with the aim or the goal of, one, establishing objective standards for interpretation as a way of preserving orthodoxy, or our understanding or beliefs, or what we believe to be orthodoxy, and then also to promote a type of tolerance, school tolerance in particular between the schools of orthodoxy that fundamentally was all about. So when you ask people often, what is fiqh? Or when they hear about fiqh, that we're having a class about fiqh, or we're studying Islamic jurisprudence, that a lot of Muslims in the public, they have the tendency to think of fiqh as all of those things that Muslims argue about, right? So many people shy away from it. So you say, fiqh, yeah, we're having a class about fiqh. You say, no, don't want to study that. Seen too many fights, and so let's stay away from it. Rather, at fiqh, it's just simply one aspect of the topics of Islam. And we know the hadith of the angel Gabriel, and scholars who argue that fiqh is simply what we call the praxis of Islam, or the laws of Islam, which are stated in that particular hadith of the angel Gabriel as being Islam itself in that particular hadith, in contradistinction to things like theology or the signs of the last day, and also Muslim moral our moral theology, what we call our virtue ethics, al-ihsan. And so this is some of the reasons why this title has been chosen for this particular topic. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says and actually on a number of occasions, He emphasizes this in many different ways throughout the Quran. And in one particular verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَجَعَلَ النَّاسَ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا. If your Lord had so willed, He would have made all humanity into a single nation, into a single brotherhood, or a single community, in terms of its ideology, in terms of its beliefs and its practices, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He so willed, He would have made everyone on the planet uniform in every single way. But then He goes on to say after this, وَلَا يَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمَ رَبُّكَ. But they will continue to be at variance with one another, except for those to whom Allah shows mercy. They will continue to be people who differ with one another. They will continue to be different from one another unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows them mercy. And so this is not an expression about our physical differences, our differences in appearance. Rather, it is an expression of our ideological, our religious differences, our differences of understanding, our differences in orientation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed that it would not be His will for everyone to be uniform in their thinking. Rather, He desires people to believe in Him and to believe in His messenger and to practice or to accept His Deen, we call it Islam. However, He wants people to do so not out of compulsion, but He wants it to be the result of persuasion and result of conviction that people have. And this is why we find in a similar verse to this, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in emphasizing the futility of compelling faith upon people. And in that particular verse, He says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَآمَنَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كُلُّهُمْ جَمِيعًا. And if your Lord has so willed that every single person would believe, would be believers. And then He says, أَفَأَنْتَ تُكْرِهُ النَّاسَ حَتَّى يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. And He's speaking to the Prophet ﷺ. Will you then compel the people in order to become believers? وَمَا كَانَ لِنَفْسٍ أَن تُؤْمِنَ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. And it's not for a soul to believe unless it be by God's permission. And so here, again, you cannot compel faith in upon anyone, even if you threaten them with execution, and you say, you have to believe. If you don't believe, I'm going to kill you. If you don't practice this, I'm going to kill you. Then I'll say, yeah, of course. If I don't want to die, I believe, or I'll do it. But in my heart, it doesn't mean anything, because with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you what you do and what you believe is not from the heart, it doesn't count to him. It doesn't count to him. In Yom Al-Qiyamah, it will be of no consequence. It will be of no consequence. And this is something we need to take into consideration. So this is speaking in a much broader sense about why we need to learn how to differ. So we learn why we differ, but also we need to learn. So we learn why we differ in order to learn how to better differ. And so this is a message, a Quranic message. So in studying the roots of interpretative disagreements as Muslims, and in particular we're talking about as Muslims, that we take that sort of more general idea and then try to apply it to the Islamic milieu. That we know that amongst Muslims that there are many different, many sects of Islam. You know, we have, of course, the Sunnis, the Shia, and their different subsects, the Ismailiyah, the Zaydiyah, the Ibadis, considered to be another sect of Islam. You know, and then amongst these sects of Islam, we have schools of law. We have the 4 schools which have survived from amongst a number of different schools historically. We have different theological schools, the Maturidi, the Ash'ari, the Mu'tazili school, the Athari school. We have in Sufism as well a number of different orders. You know, that people have different ideas about what is the most important motivation, or what should be the most important motivation when one tries to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so, and the different ways of going about trying to purify one's soul and to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and achieve moral excellence. We have many different perspectives regarding that. And then at times we find some very contentious, a very heated contention between different sects, historically and even sometimes still today, that we find this. And it's important for us, if we hope to lead people into a better way of involvement, or human sort of involvement in interactivity, then it is important for us to understand why we differ. And I guess, realistically, the real question in this particular regard is connected with what is referred to as epistemology. It starts here. Epistemology is said to be the theory of knowledge, or the theory of certainty. That is to say that often people disagree because what they consider to be a thing which constitutes the truth, or the source of the truth, is different. So if we think about the difference between Muslims and the difference between Muslims and Christians and other groups, that for the Christians, the Bible, for instance, is a source of truth for them. And for Muslims, in many parts of the Bible as well, of course, are sources of truth because, you know, for us it confirms, or the Quran confirms it, but there are certain aspects as well of the Bible that we don't consider to be valid to take as truth, or things that would establish truth in our particular context. You find some Muslims who are okay with going on to Google and searching up issues and utilizing the information that they find on the internet as a way to establish what the truth of Islam is. But then there are others who say, well, no, I would rather take my knowledge from a living scholar, right, who can actually, you know, sift through this information and tell me how to actually engage it based upon his or her sort of experience and knowledge. And so here, you know, it becomes a difference in, we can say, sort of what of epistemology, difference of the sources of certainty. And one of our Hanafi scholars, Imam Al-Nasafi, in his Aqidah, he has at the beginning of his particular book a statement when he speaks about epistemology. And he says, Asbab al-ilmi lil-khalqi thalatha. There are 3 sources of knowledge. And what he means knowledge here, doesn't simply mean just, you know, probabilistic knowledge. It means like certainty, a certain knowledge. The 3 sources of certain knowledge for humanity. And the first, he said, al-hawas al-salima, the five senses. Of course, when they're working in the proper fashion. The five senses to start with. That we know that the ground is below us, and we know that the sky is above us. We're inside this building, the ceiling is above us, right? And above the building is the sky, right? So the five senses, we have feel, taste, right? Smell, sight, hearing. That the five senses are sources for apprehending our reality to begin with. That's the first of them. And he says the second, al-khabar as-sadiq. Said the verified report. The verified report. And that is to say, one, those particular reports that have been transmitted by so many people, from so many people, that reason would deem it impossible, and custom would deem it impossible to believe that these people conspired upon a lie. We call this a khabar mutawatir. Right? For instance, we all know that China exists, even if we've never been there. We know that Iraq exists, or we know Antarctica, right, exists, even though we've never been there. Because so many people have been there, right, that we, even without being there, we have a certainty of these things. That is no reason for us to believe that they just made it up, that it was simply a lie. And another type of report is the report which originates from revelation, a khabar, which we call al-wahi. So that type of report which originates from Allah and His Messenger, or say Allah, He conveys it through the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that also for Muslims is a source of certainty, is a source of knowledge, because the Messenger, he comes, and he doesn't just come with the claim. He comes with the claim and also backs it up. He comes with the claim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent me, and you have an obligation to fulfill the commandments that He conveyed to you through me, right? And they say, well, why should we believe you? He says, well, you believe me because I have a miracle. They say, well, so-and-so had a miracle as well. Okay, well, if so-and-so has a miracle, then let so-and-so do what I can do here. And if so-and-so cannot do the same thing, then you should acknowledge that I have been sent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I've been sent by God, and I'm His messenger. So if no one can reproduce the miracle, that in itself serves as the basis, the verification of that individual, of the truthfulness of that particular claim. So first, the five senses, followed by confirmed reports or verified reports. And then the last is al-aql. He said reason itself is a source of certainty. So just as we know that a part of something is not bigger than the whole of it, right? Or that 1 + 1 = 2, or 2 is 1/4 of 8, right? So aql, reason itself, can be a source of certainty for us. So those three sources of certainty. And so in the classical period, when the scholars talked about the different types of judgments that one would make about reality, that they divided judgments into 3 or 4 basic categories. So when they talk about, they call it ahkam al-hissiyya, the sensory judgments based upon the 5 senses, right? That sugar is sweet, right? I tasted it, right? But there's also, we call ahkam al-adiyya, empirical judgments. And that is a judgment that I make not just simply by a first contact with a thing, right? I know the earth is below me, right? I know that the sky is above me. And I actually may know the sugar is sweet the first time I taste it, but I may not know that every time I taste it, it's sweet, right? I may not know that every time I place my hand in the fire that it's going to burn me. But I just know that today I put my hand in the fire and it burned me. Will it burn me again the next time? Yes, it did. And then, so through experience and through repetition, we come to know certain other things as well. I know that when I get hungry, if I eat food, it's going to satiate me, right? If I am thirsty, I drink water, it's going to remove the thirst as well. So we call those empirical judgments. And then we call it ahkam al-aqliyya, judgments of reason, the judgments of reason. That is to say, when we declare something to be possible, impossible, or necessary to exist. And then finally, and most importantly for us in this discussion, is what we call al-ahkam al-Shariah, the judgments of the revealed law, or judgments of the sacred law. And so in fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, the aim of fiqh is for us to discover what is the particular value that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, or we believe he would place on certain actions that we do, that we believe every single action that we do has a particular moral value assigned to it. Either that value is compulsory, that this particular action is compulsory, or it is recommended, or is disliked, or it's unlawful, or it is neutral. That we believe everything that we do, even the movement of my hand, it has a judgment, it has a particular moral value assigned to it. And so these are the values that we have an interest in when we study Al-Fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence. And so we're studying, in this particular case, Usul al-Fiqh, the roots of interpretative disagreements, or the foundations of Islamic jurisprudence. And so one definition that I typically would give to students when I teach them this subject is the following. And I'll say it in Arabic, and then I have to come up with a translation afterwards. But it's, okay, I have it memorized in Arabic, which is معرفة دلائل الفقه الإجمالية وكيفية الاستفادة منها والحال المستفيد. معرفة دلائل الفقه الإجمالية وكيفية الاستفادة منها وحال المستفيد. So it has to say knowledge of the non-specific evidences for Islamic jurisprudence, or the unspecified evidences of Islamic jurisprudence, the manner of deriving those rulings, or those evidences, and the state of the one deriving or taking benefit from those particular proofs. And so it is to say that when we study Usul al-Fiqh, that you're not just simply studying the sources of Islamic law. That is the beginning, the first of it. So ma'arifatu dala'il al-fiqh, so knowledge of the evidences of jurisprudence, or evidences of law. And that is the evidences, both the sources and mainly in this particular case, we're talking about the sources. So the Quran, that we want to know what Allah expects from us. We go to the Quran, or we go to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, or we make a deduction through what we call al-qiyas, legal analogy, or some other source of Islamic law. And then the second topic which is discussed. So after discussing the sources and the thing that makes those sources authoritative, then we go to what is called al-mabahith al-lughawiyya, or the part of that definition, kayfiyat al-istifadati minha, the manner of deriving benefit from those sources. That is to say, now we're studying the areas of the rules of language, or rules of interpretation, right? What are certain linguistic constructs involved in the Quran, in the Sunnah, and the different expressions? What do they indicate? Are they to be taken literally or figuratively in this particular case? And so that is what it becomes an essential part of that particular study. Wahal al-Mustafid, and the state of the one taking the benefit. Most of the scholars say that this particular aspect, which is a discussion about the qualifications of one deriving rulings or interpreting the Quran or the sources of Islam, that the qualifications for doing so, and we're speaking about the mufti and the mustafti, the mufti and the one seeking the fatwa from a mufti, so that most of the scholars say that that particular aspect is not from the core topics of Usul al-Fiqh, not one of the core topics of it, but is typically mentioned in the definition of Usul al-Fiqh. And so this is why, again, I didn't want to utilize one of the reasons why I didn't want to utilize one of the more standard translations of Usul al-Fiqh, as these are some of the reasons. Which brings us to a discussion of Shariah, the word Shariah. And we know that, of course, in the public sphere, that there are many different ideas that people have about Sharia law. And I like to tell people that one of the basic reasons that non-Muslims are confused about what Sharia law is because so many Muslims are. All right. And so a lot of non-Muslims believe, of course, that Sharia law is nothing more than the penal code. In particular, the corporal penal code. Cutting off hands, hitting people in their backs, for certain sins, right? Or whipping them for certain sins, stoning, and they're not totally at fault for that, because there are many Muslims who do emphasize those things so much that you would think that that is all Islam is, because when you have people saying that this particular country is not a Muslim country, why? Because they don't kill people. And it sounds crazy to think about it. They say that, so you're not an authentic Muslim country or Muslim nation because you don't kill people, right? It's really crazy, knowing that the religion is so much focused on rahmah, that every surah begins with rahmah, and that the Prophet ﷺ was sent as a rahmah for al-alameen, and so except for Surah Tawbah, the only surah in the Quran which doesn't begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and that is largely about warfare. But even in Surah Tawbah, there are instances of rahmah all throughout the surah itself, but it just doesn't begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and so to think that the Sharia or Islam is only about just compelling people to obey God, right? Or scaring people into obey God, or scaring people into leaving us alone by showing them how savage we can be, is a big problem, you see. And so the Sharia law, realistically, when we think about Islamic history to begin with, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ received the Quran over a period of 23 years. And the first 13 years he was in Mecca, and most of the laws of Islam we characterize today as al-Fiqh or Shariah were not revealed during that period. And then Medina he spent 10 years, and most of the laws of Islam were revealed during the latter period of the Medinan period. During the latter period, like sometimes a lot of them within the last 3 years of that period, which lets you know how much emphasis was placed upon the law itself during that early period of Islam. In the Quran is over 6,000 verses. And of those verses, they're probably about 500 which pertain to law. And there are much fewer than that, less than 100 which pertain, well, not even near 100 that pertain to any type of punishment or penal code. But at any rate, just to put things in perspective, a Sharia law can be viewed in two different basic ways. That Sharia law can be translated as the revealed law. Revealed law. And this would be similar to the ways that the Christian patriarchs understood the idea of revealed law as well, which is to say that this is the law which is transmitted to us from God, right? And so Islam will become, when we think of Sharia in that sense, it is what the Prophet ﷺ brought us and what he gave us. And anything beyond that is not Sharia, right? That's one way of looking at it. But we add to this as well that the Sharia is not just simply law. That Sharia is also ethics too, because when we look at the aspects of the law which are enforceable, you only have 2 out of 5 basic values. What's enforceable is a haram. If something's haram, unlawful, then according to the theory that the state has the right to prevent violations of the law. And then there are things that are compulsory, and the state theoretically has the authority to impose or compel people to obey those. But then between those two, you have makruh and mubah and masnoon, or say sunnah. Things are recommended. There are some things that are neutral, than others that are disliked, which are not punishable. They're not enforceable. So the Sharia is not only dealing with those things, the aspects of the law that are enforceable, rather they're also dealing with those things that are recommended. There should be encouragement, or there's aspects of encouragement or discouragement, things that Islam is asking people to do because they're good in it, and asking them to avoid because it will be better for you and for the community. So you have revealed law. But then also, so that's one way of seeing the Sharia law. It's just simply that which was revealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the problem with seeing Sharia law only in those terms is that there are many different things, the different the expressions or the language of the Quran, the language of the Sunnah is not all unambiguous, right? Not everything is univocal. That there are many different things in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ which are ambiguous. They're open to interpretation. They can be interpreted more than one way. And so in Surah Al-Imran, Surah 3, verse 6, a very famous verse, which is typically quoted in the area of theology or in theological debates. In this particular verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ الْكِتَابِ وَأُخَرَ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. It is He who revealed to you the book. From it are verses which are clear, univocal. They're not open to interpretation. وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. And there are others which are ambiguous, allegorical. Right, so typically you find in translations that they're allegorical, but also this you can just simply translate it as ambiguous. Now the difference between an ambiguous verse which emphasizes or gives the impression to Muslims that we are to take that particular understanding or verse and adopt a certain belief regarding it, and is not connected with practice, it's a difference between that and the other verses that may be ambiguous, but actually demand that we actually do something with it, right? So as Muslims, there's no problem with the verse being ambiguous if it's asking us to do something. That it is our obligation to act upon the verse. But when we act upon it, we may differ about how the application should be done, how that should be executed. And so in this particular sense, so this led to scholars interpreting those verses. And in interpretation of those verses, there were some people who, didn't have any rules for interpretation, and others who felt that, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that if He speaks with the wisdom, and things should be, He made His people of reason and people of logic, then there should be as well a particular logic involved with the way that we approach the Quran, the way we approach the Sunnah. It shouldn't just simply be a haphazard type of process where anyone can come and say anything that they want to about the Quran and about the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so they wanted to, of course, somewhat to restrict people's their boldness to simply say about the Quran whatever they felt was okay to say about it. And so it was important I do want to open up the book in a second and tell you a little bit about the author, but this is an important introduction, I believe, to this particular study. So as we may differ about what is considered to be a valid source for deriving the law or deriving our understanding of theology or other things like that. But also there are other considerations. Like the scholar Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayhi, he said that when we look at the disagreements that exist between the different scholars of Islam, and in particular the four Imams, that you can reduce the source of their disagreements to three basic things. He has a book called Raf'ul Malam an A'immatul A'lam, removing blame from the distinguished Imams. And in this book, he expounds upon these three sources of disagreement. So it says the first reason that they would disagree would be because they didn't believe that the Prophet ﷺ said something. That's the first reason that they would disagree. Imam Abu Hanifa would disagree with Imam Malik because Imam Abu Hanifa didn't consider to be a hadith of the Prophet, or vice versa. That's the first reason. They didn't believe that it was something the Prophet ﷺ said. So even if the scholars of hadith are actually taking one position, that the fuqaha or the usuliyin, like the four imams, they may not accept a hadith. Even if a hadith sometimes isn't the Sahih of Imam Bukhari or Sahih Muslim, because this was a later development as well, that many of the hadiths that are found in those collections, that Imam Abu Hanifa had his own criterion for determining the authenticity of those particular hadiths. And so if he didn't believe that these hadiths were authentic, for instance, he wouldn't accept it, he wouldn't act upon it. So that's the first reason they didn't believe that the Prophet ﷺ said it. The second reason would be that okay, they believe that the Prophet ﷺ said it, but the words of the Prophet or Allah are ambiguous. They're open to interpretation. They can be understood this way or understood that way. They can be understood literally or metaphorically. And when we don't have any certainty about what was intended, then you'll find some going in this direction, some going in that direction. The third reason, he said, was because the scholars believed that the particular injunction or statement was abrogated by a different statement. So 3 basic reasons. They didn't believe that he said it, or they believed or because it was ambiguous, or thirdly, because they believed it was abrogated. And so, of course, these principles took time for scholars to adopt. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was no such thing as fiqh. There was nothing more than said revelation. That the Sahaba had an issue, they took it straight to the Prophet ﷺ. And then after his death, the Sahaba themselves, they were confronted with a lot of new matters. And so they tried to begin a process. And then it passed on to the Tabi'een as well. And then eventually what had occurred was that more and more the scholars began to write about the subject of Usul al-Fiqh. And so there's debate about who is considered to be the true originator of the science, or the codifier of the science, put it like that. Because, of course, the originator, you can't really say that a single person was the originator when you have a lot of different people involved with the same process. In the same way that people say about modernity, they say that modernity, it started in the West, and then many people argue that, no, there are different modernities. There wasn't just a modernity in the West, there was also modernity in the East and the South and the North. There are many different modernities happening simultaneously. But at any rate, the Hanafis, many of the Hanafis say that it was Abu Yusuf was the very first person to actually codify the science of Usul al-Fiqh, or speak about the ways of interpreting the Quran and the sources of Islamic law. However, his works have been lost. We don't know this, but Ibn Nadim, the Hanafi scholar, famous Hanafi scholar, he mentions this in his Fihras. He attributes it to Imam Abu Yusuf from the Hanafi school. The Shia, they claimed it was Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, who was the father of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Baqir. And so Ja'far al-Sadiq, who was the founder of the 12 Shi'i tradition, that they say it was their Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, that he was the first to codify it. That some of the Malikis say Imam Malik. Right? So everybody, of course, wants to give credit to their own Imam. And then, but in spite of all that, the person that the overwhelming majority of scholars attribute the codification of this particular science, as well as the science of hadith, to was Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, rahmatullahi alayhi, who spoke about this in a very clearly articulated fashion in his Al-Risala, his epistle. And so he's considered to be the first to codify both the science or discussions of the principle of the science of hadith and science of narrators, and then also Usul al-Fiqh, Islamic legal theory, or the foundations of Islamic jurisprudence. And so what we're going to be studying during this semester is a book written by a scholar from the 16th century, in some place a century before that, known as scholar Yahya ibn Nuruddin al-Amriti, who was an Egyptian Shafi'i scholar from the town of Amrit, and that's where Amriti comes from. And Amriti gained popularity in that particular time because he took a few major works in the Shafi'i school in particular, and he versified them. Like, for instance, Imam Al-Juwaini's book, Imam Abdul Malik, Imam Al-Haramain Al-Juwaini is the original author of this particular work called Al-Waraqat, which you can roughly translate as the papers or the legal papers. And so, and it is an introductory text to the science of Usul al-Fiqh. So most people who study Usul al-Fiqh, they usually start with Imam Al-Juwaini, Imam Al-Haramain Al-Juwaini. He's called Imam Al-Haramain the Imam of the two sanctuaries because he spent time teaching in Mecca after leaving his town, leaving Nisabur, and then during a sort of civil crisis, he left and then moved to Mecca. He spent a number of years there in Mecca teaching, and then after this he moved to Medina and taught in Medina. So he taught in the Haram of Mecca and the Haram of Medina. So he gained the title of Imam Al-Haramain. And so he also well known as being the main teacher of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, rahmatullah alayhi, as well. So Imam Al-Juwaini is extremely important. But Imam Al-Amriti, who lived some centuries after him, of course, he was in the 15th or 16th century, and Imam Al-Haramain would have been a number of centuries before that. The math is not coming to me at the moment, but Al-Amriti became famous because he took books such as the Al-Jarumiyya of Ibn Ajarum in grammar, Arabic grammar, and he versified it. He also took the Taqrib, Ghayat al-Taqrib of Imam Abu Shuja', and he versified it as well. And then he took this particular book of the Waraqat of Imam Al-Juwaini, and he versified it as well. That is to say that he made it into a poem, realizing the fact that it's much easier for people to retain knowledge when it is rhymed. And this is one of the reasons it's easy to memorize the Quran as well. وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. We made the Quran easy to remember, right? And so one of the main reasons is because it's such a melodious book, that is a lot of rhyme involved, So scholars, they took advantage of this as well, and they took a lot of important texts and they versified them. And we study a number of those texts like this here at Zaytuna as well, such as the Manzumat al-Bayquniya and the Science of Hadith and Jawharat al-Tawheed and Theology, as well as Ibn Ashar, the Murshid Ma'in Ibn Ashar, and the students generally are familiar with this. So this particular book, Imam Al-Juwaini's original book, was a book that covered about 20 chapters related to the discussion of Usul al-Fiqh. And so Imam Al-Amriti as well tried to maintain a similar division. And so we'll be working with the translation of our very own Dr. Hatem Bazian as well of this particular work. And so we have three great people that we're working with here, inshallah. And so I did want to begin at least with the introduction of the text before I open up for any type of comments or question, inshallah, before we conclude for the day. So Imriti, he begins by saying, قال الفقير الشرى في العمريطي ذو العجز بالتقصير والتفريط. Says the poor in lineage at Amriti, the one marked by impotence, deficiency, and shortcomings. And so what I'll be doing at times as well is I will be offering my own translation too, because that's one of the challenges of translation is that that many of these texts are not voweled at times by the original authors, and so some of the commentators are guessing about what the proper vowels which should be on the actual verses themselves. So at times you might find me differing with Dr. Hatem as well. So he's still a great man. But so he begins, as is often the case with many of the scholars, he begins with his humility. قال الفقير الشرفي العمريطي. And so he's speaking about himself, thinking about in the third person. And it says the poor in lineage. So here, al-faqir al-sharafi. And this is what we call in the Arabic, called an idafa, right? Idafa tasifa ila al-mawsuf, right? It's an alif lam on both of the words. And we're familiar with, the mudaf or the first term of the genitive construct of not having the alif lam, but this is a special type of idafa if we translate it this way. I would actually venture to say that it's not idafa, but I'll explain that in a second. But according to Dr. Hatton, the way he's translated it is as if it is an idafa. It is a genitive construct. So this poor person or this needy person who is himself, and in particular, in this particular case, he is poor in lineage, according to this translation. That is to say that he doesn't have a noble lineage as the Prophet ﷺ has, or other people who are connected with the Prophet ﷺ have a poor lineage. Rather, I personally believe that this is not an idafa, or rather this is actually just simply another descriptive term, which would be al-faqir al-sharifu. And that is to say that faqir al-sharaf. Al-sharaf in this particular case is his way of alluding to his other name, which is Sharafuddin, right? And so Amriti is also known as Sharafuddin. So qala faqir al-sharaf al-Amriti. So as if he said qala Sharafuddin al-Amriti. Sharafuddin al-Amriti, he said such and such. He said that, but he begins with his humility, meaning he is an individual who he has need for his Lord. And he continues, the one marked by impotence, that is a lack of ability, a lack of power, of independent power, taqsir, of a deficiency, one who falls short, taqsiri, and one who is negligent. So he begins with this, and as one way of saying, one who's sinful. This sinful person who is in need of the forgiveness of his Lord. Sharafuddin al-Amriti had this to say. That's one way to look at it. That's fundamentally is what he's doing, And so in this, I guess you would say, it's his way of saying, we begin by saying, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Right? There's no might and no power except by God. Right? And I myself turn to my Lord in forgiveness, beginning in this faith, and acknowledging as well that what I'm able to do here afterwards is not through my own power, rather it is through your power, through the power, because I would not be able to do any of it had it not been that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me the grace to do so. Then he says, Alhamdulillah alladhi qad adhara ilm al-usuli lil-wara wa ashhara. Praise is to Allah who made apparent the science of al-usul for humanity and made it famous. And so, Alhamdulillah alladhi qad adhara ilm al-usuli lil-wara. Al-wara, for those who may not know, because this class is for the benefit of our students here at Zaytuna. So those who know Arabic, this is some benefits are coming to you. Al-wara is another word for humanity. Right? So adhara, so when we find this alif at the end of the verse in this particular case, now we know that adhara typically would be for a dual actor, right? But because it's a poem, the alif is just simply there as an addition. It's an addition. We call aliful itlaq. Right? It comes at the end of the verse itself. But so really he's saying Alhamdulillah alladhi qad adhara. Not adhara, qad adhara, because Allah is not two, right? Praise be to Allah who made manifest ilm al-usuli. So the maf'ul bihi, the object of the verb, he made manifest what? He made manifest the knowledge of the foundations. And usul al-fiqh, and this is the point I meant to make earlier today as well, which is that usul al-fiqh is one of the meta disciplines of Islam. There are two meta disciplines of Islam, but the true meta discipline is theology. We call Usul Al-Deen. And then the second of the meta disciplines is what we call Usul Al-Fiqh. Right? Usul Al-Deen, so the ulama refer to these two as Al-Aslan, the two foundations. And so Usul Al-Deen, which is another term for theology, is the most important, of course, because without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing else we do really has any true meaning. And it's because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we become acquainted with everything that we know in this world. Right? And usul al-fiqh being the second of them, in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not only want us to know Him, but He also expects certain things from us as well. So there's the belief, but then also there's praxis that goes along with it as well. So praise be to the one who made it manifest, made manifest to us the knowledge of the foundations, right? Lidwara, he made the knowledge of the foundations to apparent to humanity. Wa ashhara, and the same thing that was said about adhara, we say about ashhara here. So it's not ashhara, it's ashhara. That's the origin, or ashharan. Is it with the nun tawkid? Ashhara adharan ashharan. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he made it apparent, and here he also made it well known or made it famous, as the translator points out. ثم الصلاة والسلام سرمدا على زكي ثم الصلاة والسلام سرمدا على زكي أصلي طه أحمدا. It says, then the blessings and peace and prosperity on the one of pure origin, Taha Ahmada. Right? Who's Taha Ahmada? Yeah, everybody better know who that is, right? Right. So again, after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is your first benefactor, right? The benefactor of all, that we show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We acknowledge our need in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we acknowledge the blessings that He's given us through His power. Then secondly, we follow it up with sending blessing and peace, or asking for blessing and peace be shown to the second benefactor, because had it not been for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, none of us would know Islam, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him, and he conveyed the message of Islam to us through Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And he is our uswa, he is our exemplar, and he is an excellent exemplar, as we know, uswatun hasana. Then he says, أصل الأصول أشرف العباد وآله وصحبه الأمجاد. The foremost of all sources, the most honorable of all slaves, his family and his companions, the glorious. Right, so here, so this is following up what he said about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ثم الصلاة والسلام سرمدا على زكي الأصلي طه أحمد, that we send everlasting peace and blessing upon the one who is pure of origin, Muhammad Taha Ahmada is the two of his names. Aslul Usuli. So here is what we call badal or arful bayan, that is like sort of a substitute. So we send blessing and peace upon Taha Ahmada Aslul Usuli, the one who is the source of all sources. The source of all sources of knowledge in this particular case. What he means by it, he's a source of all sources. Ashraf al-ibadi. Hala, and this is what we can call al-hal, maf'ul al-hal. It is a conditional attribute which comes mentioned after it. And this is why it takes the fatha in this particular bait. Ashraf al-ibadi. Hala kawnihi ashraf al-ibadi. So as if saying, that we send blessing and peace upon Taha Ahmad, who is the source of all sources of knowledge, while being the most noble of all people. Al-ibad. And the word al-ibad in the Arabic language can translate as people, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to us as his ibad. That when it is said in the hadith that, Wallahu fi kuna abdi, Ma kana abdu fi awni akhi, Allah is at the aid of the slave as long as the slave is at the aid of his brother. Rather, Allah is at the aid of a person as long as the person is at the aid of his brother or her sister, of his sister, or his or her brother or sister. Wa alihi wa sahbihi al-amjadi. And so here, this is also to continue what was started before, which is when he talked about thumma salatu wa salamu sarmada. So peace and blessing and peace be upon Taha Ahmad, but also blessing and peace be upon alihi wa sahbihi al-amjadi, as well be upon his family, his companions, or say his glorious companions, if we make it an attribute. And so, whereas Dr. Hatim's made it, and we call it badal, a substitute, both of them are possible. وَبَعْدُ فَالْعِلْمُ بِأَصْلِ الْفِقْهِ مُكَمِّلُ قَارِئِ عِلْمِ الْفِقْهِ. Then the knowledge with Usul al-Fiqh completes the students of this discipline of fiqh. Right. So here he begins speaking about the topic, the subject of our study. The knowledge of asl al-fiqh, or the foundation or the source of jurisprudence, mukammilu qari'i ilm al-fiqh. It completes the student of the discipline of jurisprudence. Right, so for instance, historically, the ulama or the students of fiqh, they would begin by studying jurisprudence. They would cover a lot of the chapters of al-fiqh before they would study usul al-fiqh. Nowadays we kind of do it together. We mix it up a little bit. But throughout most of Islamic history, during our sort of, when our education was a bit more stable, that a tradition developed where students would not study usul al-fiqh until they had a number of years of the study of fiqh. And what it does is it would augment their understanding as well once they study usul al-fiqh. And many of the issues that are dealt with in usul al-fiqh are dealt with by allusion. They sort of alluded to. And so sometimes they all just say, well, just like in this particular book, in this particular chapter, just like this issue, right, in this particular chapter. And so if the student hasn't studied fiqh, they really don't know what the author is talking about. So they assume that you already know what they're talking about, right? Like, for instance, one book I remember studying and it gave an example. It said, like in the issue of Shatu Jibran, the sheep of the redemptive sheep issue, the issue of the redemptive sheep. And it's like, well, what the heck is that talking about? And it's talking about matter regarding issues of zakat. And so typically that is what would occur. So, but then after studying fiqh, you would study usul al-fiqh. And because without usul al-fiqh, you would not be able to rise to the higher levels of scholarship. So it is something that perfects or completes the student in their studies. فَذَاكَ بِالْفَضْلِ الْجَلِيلِ أَحْرَى وَاللَّهُ ذُو النَّيْلِ جَزِيلِ أَجْرَى على لسان الشافعي وهوانا فهو الذي له ابتداء دوانا. Right, so I mean some of the vowels are a little bit off, but it says the former is more worthy of splendor. So the former in this case, meaning al-fiqh, the studying of Islamic law, is more worthy of splendor. And so the scholars would say sharaf al-ilmi bi sharafi muta'allaqihi, that the importance of a knowledge or a subject is determined by the importance of the thing that it pertains to. And so for instance, theology is considered to be the true meta-discipline because the subject of theology is God himself. So it is the most noble of all sciences. And so fiqh becomes as well a very noble science because it pertains to praxis, whereas usul is more so about theory. So it's less important in that sense, but really we study usul so that we can get fiqh. The aim of usul is to extract jurisprudence. So he says, the former is more worthy of splendor and excellence with Allah, who gives generous attainment, enabled the tongue of Shafi'i to express it and made it easy for him, and he as Shafi'i is the first to have codified it. So here he's acknowledging, and of course, being a Shafi'i himself, Imam Amriti, let's take great pride. Imam Shafi'i was the first. I mean, that's most of the scholars say as well. They acknowledge that. وَتَابَعَتْهُ النَّاسُ حَتَّى صَارَ كُتْبًا صِغَارَ الْحِزْمِ أَوْ كِبَارًا. Right, so تَابَعَتْهُ النَّاسُ, not nasa. That's an error there. And then the verse above, فَهْوَ الَّذِي, should be فَهْوَ الَّذِي, not فَهُوَ الَّذِي. فَهْوَ الَّذِي لَهُ ابْتِدَاءً دَوَّنَا. تَابَعَتْهُ النَّاسُ حَتَّى صَارَ كُتْبًا صِغَارَ الْحِزْمِ أَوْ كِبَارًا. Said people succeeded him until they brought it into being books, small or great in volumes. وخير كتبه الصغار ما سمي بالورقات للإمام الحرامي. And the best of the small books on Al-Usul is that which is named Al-Waraqat by Imam Al-Haramain. وقد سئلت مدة في نظمه مسهلا لحفظه وفهمه. And I was asked for a long time to versify it. I was asked for a long time to versify it, making it easy for memorization and understanding. فلم أجد مما سئلت بدا وقد شارعت فيه مستمدا من من ربنا التوفيق للصواب ونفع في الدارين بالكتاب. So I found myself obliged to do that which I was asked. I began seeking from our Lord guidance to the truth, right accuracy, or guidance to that which is right and which is accurate, and benefits in both realms from the book. Or another way to translate this instead of from the book will be that and seeking benefits in both realms, meaning from this realm and the hereafter, by writing. So al-kitab often is utilized in poetry, especially as al-kitaba, right? So he's seeking the blessing from Allah through writing itself, as opposed to through the book, which some may understand to be a reference to the Quran itself. So, wa sallallahu alayhi wa Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So if there are any questions remaining after this, inshallah, I don't know how much time we have, but that was an introduction, and I did want to leave a little bit more time for questions. I'm sorry about that. Mm-hmm. No, ilham doesn't, in terms of definitive knowledge, ilham is not a way of definitive knowledge. It is a non-definitive type of a source of knowledge in the Islamic tradition. Same thing like with dreams and others. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So the question was like, is ilham, which is more a type of super sensory type of knowledge, as opposed to wahi, which is revealed knowledge, inspiration, divine revelation, which came to the Prophet ﷺ. Ilham, sort of instinctive knowledge or understanding that comes to people. Yeah, the question was, is that considered to be one of the definitive sources of knowledge? Right? That was the question. Right. Does it right? Right. No. So it's not included amongst them. So I mentioned there are three sources of definitive knowledge mentioned by Imam Nasafi and accepted by our scholars, which are the knowledge which is acquired through the five senses, the second through the sort of confirmed or verified reports, like the reports of tawatur, of indisputable authenticity. And then you have, of course, wahi itself, which they're under the same category, khabar sadiq. So mutawatir and the wahi are in that same category, right? And then you have at the end an aql, reason, becomes a source of certainty. No. Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. If we make it mansub, we make it in that particular verse, verse 4, when he says, Aslul usuli ashraf al-ibadi, the ashrafa as a tafdeel, right, a superlative word, that if we make it, place it in an accusative case, it is considered to be hal. So it's as if he said, Aslul usuli hala kawnihi ashraf al-ibadi. If we make it mansub, but it can also make it marfu' if you place a dhamma on it as well, and that would be an equally valid vowelization of that particular verse. Aslu usuli ashraful ibadi, and it can actually even be translated as mubtada khabar. So the foundation, the source of all the source of the sources is the most noble of all people, right? It can be translated that way too, but the way that it's vowed in this particular case is vowed as if it would be hal. Right, exactly. Right, exactly. That when we speak about the issue of law and what's enforceable, that in theory, the state only has the right to enforce the rules that pertain to haram and wajib. That is to say that so if it's compulsory, like for instance, the issue of adultery, fornication, or drinking wine, or murder, those type of things. The state, in the according to Islamic teachings, then they have the right to prevent those things and have an obligation as well to do, not just a right but an obligation to prevent those type of things. And if there's something compulsory for people to do as well, that they have a right to, right? For instance, if people have to pay taxes, for instance, right? Pay zakat, that the state can actually go extract it from them according to our legal theorists, that they have the right to do so. But in between, everything between that, they don't necessarily have a right to enforce unless there is, of course, in some type of aggravating circumstance, that leads them to do those type of things. It's something that happens in society that they may be able to, they may have some type of discretionary authority to make something which originally was not compulsory, make it something compulsory or binding. If there's some major interest in maintaining order, at least temporarily. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, Fahim, so how much more time I have? Just a few minutes? 2 minutes, okay. Name 6. Yeah, it should be Nasu, right? Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, just in terms of the meter itself, that it wouldn't be fahuwa alladhi lahu ibtida'an dawana. It would be fahwa. It still means the same thing, but it just usually they'll place the sukun on the ha. Fahuwa alladhi lahu ibtida'an dawana. Right. Now, Harun. Oh, yes, sure. So, question from online. Right. So the three forms of judgments that I listed, and I'm actually alluded to a fourth, but the three types of judgments I listed were rational judgments, empirical judgments, and scriptural judgments, or judgments of the sacred law, we can say. But then I also alluded to sensory judgments, so just basic judgments about, feeling, and that we come up with the senses, that, where are we? What am I doing right now? But the more important of the other three, the empirical judgments, which are based upon experience and repetition, and rational judgment, which are purely, rooted in our minds and our thinking, and then the scriptural judgments, which originate from revelation and from the area of jurisprudence. So we have time for one more or no? Inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah. Asalaamu Alaikum, Adrian. Yeah. Is there time for one more or no? One more? None of the sisters had any questions? Well, it's always good. To me, it's a good sign when people don't have questions. It means that they understood everything, right? Or they're too shy. Okay. I guess that's it. So, inshallah, until next week, we appreciate you coming out, and hopefully that there'll be some significant benefit for you from this particular course and the other course as well. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.